Two, one, zero.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our panel discussion, Fortress or Frontier, the EU's Enlargement Dilemma. My name is Karolina Zbytniewska. I'm Chief Editor at EURACTIV Poland, and I have the pleasure and honor of chairing today's conversation. With Poland currently holding the presidency of the EU Council, the question of enlargement has once again moved to the top of the European agenda, not only as a geopolitical imperative, but also as a normative challenge. Today, we bring together distinguished voices from the Visegrad countries and Ukraine to reflect on what EU enlargement has meant in the past and what it should mean in the future. So let me introduce our speakers. Jan Kovář, Research Director at the Institute of International Relations in Prague. Welcome.
Hello.
Pavol Demeš, Slovak Foreign Policy Analyst, former Minister of International Relations. Good morning.
Thank you for invitation.
Our pleasure. Dr. Daniel Szeligowski, Head of Eastern Europe Program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Hello.
Hello, good morning, everybody.
And Professor Nataliya Vinnykova, Head of the Department of International Relations at Karazin Kharkiv National University. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
So, without much further ado, let's turn to very important questions because we have really distinguished speakers and really no time to waste. Let's start with Daniel Szeligowski. So, what are the current prospects for EU enlargement, especially with regard to Ukraine, and what conditions need to be met, and what is the expected timeline?
First, thank you for having me here. Second, I still do believe that the most important question, regardless of what the title of our panel is, the most important question is how to win the war against Russia in Ukraine. I've been to Germany a few days ago, and I told my German colleagues, that was sort of a joke, but they say there is always a degree of truth in any joke, that the ministry which is responsible for European integration of Ukraine and Germany is now called Rheinmetall. Because unless you win the war in Ukraine, there is really a gloom perspective for any kind of enlargement. This is not about Ukraine. The whole process now boils down to winning the war. And we remember what were the conditions of giving Ukraine the candidate status. So it all started with the invasion, unfortunately, but we have to take this into account. And of course, this is this point of departure is extremely important for the whole process. Even if we are discussing Ukraine's EU accession perspective and post-war reconstitution, recover, reconstruction, etc. This is very easy. I mean, the less is destroyed now by the Russians, the less is there in future to be rebuilt, and the easier for Ukraine would be to join the European Union and to fulfill the criteria. So this is one thing. The second thing, of course, very important, also is that there is still valid, and no one canceled it. Please remember about it. There is still an Article 42.7 in the EU Treaty, which is de facto purpose of the Euro. Mutual defense clause, which is even in terms of wording even stronger than NATO Article 5. So again, we are talking about security guarantees, and we know what's the mood now in Europe. Very few countries, if any, would be willing to give security guarantees to Ukraine for the moment, as of today. So without solving this very difficult question of connection between security guarantees and war, again, it will be very difficult for Ukraine to move forward on EU accession path. And what it means, because some say in Europe that first You have to end the war, and then possibly you will have security guarantees. Some would say, and I'm rather a proponent of this approach, that actually you can come up with security guarantees for post-war Ukraine first, and then it will be a bit easier for Ukraine to end this war, because you know what's the ground on which you operate. But we have this dilemma which is still unsolved, and this creates a lot of problems for Ukraine as well. The third moment, again, I will mention it very briefly. I am still yet to be convinced that there is truly a consensus within the European Union, regardless enlargement and regardless Ukraine. Again, I am pointing this finger at my German colleagues. I am yet to be convinced, which means that I am not convinced yet that there is a consensus in different capitals regarding Ukraine's accession prospects. I know there's a lot of declarations, but declarations is one thing, and real policies is a bit different thing. Now, of course, in terms of framework, I mean, you may, of course, disagree with me, because this is obviously a speculation, but I want to refer to the framework that we used once in Poland in our own accession perspective. So we used to see the things through the prism of multi-annual financial frameworks of the European Union. It all boils down to the assumption that you have to have the money to enlarge the European Union, which brings me to the final conclusion. I'm usually saying that we are now discussing the next MFF, which is post 27. From my perspective, this could be a framework to prepare the Union for an enlargement, which would be 27-34. And the next MFF post 34, this could essentially be a framework for already enlarged Union. So I'm telling always my Ukrainian colleagues that if they join the European Union in 10 years' time, which was like more or less the framework for Poland, 10 years' time, then I would say this is a very optimistic scenario, and you shouldn't really disprove that as something pessimistic or I don't know, someone creating obstacles for your enlargement. There's still a long way to go, and I think if 10 years' time really materializes, I would say this has been a success.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So summing that up, please correct me if I'm wrong. So you are saying that there is no policy consensus in the EU as regards enlargement, and there is no policy consensus as regards security guarantees, yes? And I think that you are also saying, and as far as I know from the budget commissioner, there is indeed no money, no budget yet earmarked for the next multi-annual perspective for enlarged European Union. So we have three effects of what you were saying, yes?
Well, very quickly, in terms of the money, I may be pessimistic. The people who know better than I told me recently in Brussels that if there is an enlargement, the money will be generated very quickly. So let's say I take it for granted. Yes, I believe them. In terms of the consensus, I still, again, I underline, I am not sure if the consensus is there. There is this discussion what should come first, whether EU internal reform or whether enlargement. And if we are discussing enlargement precisely, whether we are discussing next big bang enlargement or enlargement only for a few countries. I think there is no answer to these questions yet, which again brings me to my conclusion that I don't think there is consensus yet. This is important, yet. We are still in the process of discussing these things.
Thank you so much. So let's turn to Nataliya. Nataliya, what's the status of EU-Ukraine accession talks from your perspective, and how would you address takeaways from what Daniel was saying as regards the end of the war first and then accession?
Okay, let's start from that. It is already a year past from formal launch of accession negotiations, right? That held on June in 2024. And as a part of the negotiations that are organized in clusters and chapters, that the country has to align its laws and status with those of the EU. what do we have right now on June 2025? The first screening report on Cluster 1, the so-called fundamentals that deals with judiciary and the rule of law and as well as public administration has been submitted to the Council of the EU, and it's a milestone. And reports on Cluster 2, internal market, as well as Cluster 6, external relations, are expected to be submitted at the end of June as well. The screening process, which assesses Ukraine's legal alignment with the EU standards, is expected to conclude by the autumn 2025. And this is, I would say, an optimistic scenario because we have some obstacles. And one of that already have been mentioned is there is no comprehensive consensus, unfortunately, in the European Union, even to start those negotiations to open clusters. Till now, the Ukrainian government approved the roadmaps needed to open the first clusters and pre-accession negotiations between Ukraine and the EU. Those roadmaps include like 529 events with concrete deadlines, with concrete executors responsible for implementation of those roadmaps. And besides, last week, representatives of the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine and as well as representatives of the State Service of Fiscal Service of Ukraine also held a bilateral meeting with the representatives of the European Commission to push forward our taxation reforms that is already related to the Cluster 3. So it's quite an intense pace of the screening process, but still there is an obstacle. Ukraine EU accession has obstacles due to Hungary. Hungary blocked the opening of 2 negotiation clusters to have to be open in June, so delaying process. The Hungary has 11 recommendations to Ukraine that cause concerns for Hungary. And those recommendations are mostly related to language requirements. So the first one is to remove the state language proficiency requirements for public officials. Hungary does not plan on giving up its idea to force Ukraine to cancel legal demand for all chosen officials to speak the national language and to make speeches in the council meeting in it. And this one of the most controversial demand. And another one is related to political representation. Hungary tried to impose a demand about a guaranteed representation of national minorities in the Ukrainian parliament, our Verkhovna Rada onto Ukraine. But for right now, this idea is turned out to be politically unacceptable, since it requires changing to the constitution of the Ukraine, and which is impossible without all Ukrainian referendum. And actually, then the significant changes must be made in the constitution of Ukraine as well. So what we have right now, a fast-paced screening process, and Ukraine is making, and in particular Ukrainian government, to push it forward from one side, but from other side there is like a veto from Hungary that has not yet withdrawn its veto to start negotiations to open at least the first cluster. And my remarks on what have been said already is that definitely in this geopolitical conjuncture, it's hardly to say that we even start in negotiation. Even in optimistic scenario, the full and comprehensive accession have to be launched. I have doubt on that. We are still in ongoing war process. So we have too many obstacles right now to fulfill all requirements.
Okay, thank you. So when you are mentioning Hungary as a major obstacle, vetoing blockade towards works on your accession, I have these memories from first Greece, then Bulgaria blocking North Macedonian accession to the European Union. So do you think that Hungary can block your accession effectively or just delay it?
Right now, it's a delay, and there are consultations, technical consultations from both sides initiated by Ukrainian part, from government of Ukraine, and there are representatives from Hungary just discussing how we can handle their demands, or they call this recommendations. But they are definitely delayed. I hope they will not veto at all this process. Actually, there are some pressure from the European Union also on Hungary not to block it at all.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to turn to Jan Kovář. Jan, how do you assess the chances for EU enlargement from today's perspective? When might it happen? Into which countries? And what would be the conditions for Ukraine's accession perspective?
Thank you for the question. This is a very wide-ranging question. It's been difficult to tackle it for me. But I'm skeptical about, and Daniel mentioned that, I don't really see there is a consensus. I don't know whether yet or not. But the consensus is lacking on multiple levels across member states, be it, polity-wise, so the institutional operation of the EU, the enlargement, reform debate, but also be it on more, policy level, which, concerns, the existing policies, especially those which have, high fiscal costs. Well, there's just few of them, but all of them are pretty sensitive for the net beneficiaries, be it, agriculture, be it cohesion policy, or generally, be it the budget per se. The EU's budget is pretty negligible compared to EU's GDP. And if it's supposed to, finance, new member states that are largely poorer than the existing member states, to the extent, and at the same time, perhaps, retain certain financing for the current net beneficiaries of the EU's budget. It either has to be, well, increased, which I don't really see there is a consensus overall, or some of the policies have to be, downscaled or redirected rather than downscaled. But this redirection would basically, mean that it's going to have consequences for the net beneficiaries, and in some of those, including in my country, EU membership was very often sold by economic perspective. It's a cash cow, so that it's not. It's marriage of convenience, right? It's a rich husband, so we need to be there. It's not like we really love each other. And I don't think this was very wise from, the political elite in countries, selling EU membership like that. But then if you do that, people obviously understand EU membership in these perspectives. And then if you take some of this money away and redirect them elsewhere, they're not going to support either the EU or the potential accession before it happens. And you can really see, based on recent Eurobarometer data in Czechia, there is a political support, rhetorical, I would say, but still there is a political support for EU accession or enlargement, accession of new countries, but there is not popular support for that, less than half of the people. And then imagine that you're going to tell them, well, no more funds, no more debt, no more rich husband. This is not going to really work that well. And sorry, I really put it very, bluntly, but I guess that's easiest to understand. So when does it happen? I don't really see any large enlargement, block big bang or smaller big bang, happening, because this is not possible without internal reform. I don't really see how people in some of the Western European countries or politicians will be persuading their people in a referendum or in a parliamentary vote that we need to do, enlargement without institutional reform. In many of those countries, it's already, the discourse is already, we have enough, countries breaking rule of law and not so much developed, to which we send our money. And that if you have more and you retain unanimity in foreign policy, because these countries then very often say, and now we're going to block help to Ukraine, sanctions against Russia, sanctions against this and that, some of the foreign policy decisions. This is very difficult to swallow in not only in Western European countries, in many countries. In Czechia, this was hard to swallow recently as well, because it was now against our national interest of supporting Ukraine, for instance. But I don't really see any big bang because of these reasons. So there may be some salami method, one country, but this salami method, it has a limit. You cannot really do all nine candidates like that, in my viewpoint. So it may be Montenegro, because obviously that's easy to swallow in terms of geography, population, economic size, and so on and so forth. But and then it can perhaps be, I don't know. My guess would be Macedonia, Albania, in Albania in this direction. But then it would stall anyway. And I would be actually surprised if there is more than 2 countries joining the EU before 2030. But this is just my guess. And from my perspective, this certainly is not going to be a large member state like Ukraine. So I will probably stop here, so as not to talk for too long. I tried to tackle at least some of your questions and give my general viewpoint on that. I'll be happy to return to that later, but there's plenty of us, and everybody should have a fair space to speak. So thank you, Karolina.
Can you just please repeat the year that you are presuming that is the earliest one for accession to start?
2030, I would say.
30, so in 5 years. That's not so bad. I have another follow-up question.
It would be Montenegro, perhaps. That's yeah.
I have another follow-up question. So, do you see any other arguments other than financial ones to advertise Ukrainian accession to the European Union to the region's citizens?
Yes,
so if the husband is less rich, what else?
I would always basically, but that was always my idea, EU membership's not supposed to be promoted on economic terms only. I mean, like, obviously it should help EU citizens, to for their well-being, but this should also be primarily, value-based and security-based, argumentation. And we do have this security-based argumentation for Ukraine, but we don't really have the value-based, argumentations that, we need to, and we should be extending, the space of shared values. But then the question would also be, do we still have shared values or within the EU? Because I'm afraid that to a certain extent, we're really undermining even these foundational shared values. But that was always, how I understood membership in the EU since when I was a student at a University of EU politics 20 plus years ago. So, but that's generally lacking, except for the geopolitical necessity, which doesn't really say anything to the people. I mean, like, if you're not an expert, what does it even mean, geopolitical necessity? I mean, like, I tell it to my mom and she's like, well, okay, yeah, well, can you just elaborate a little bit? Because,
Okay, money is the easiest of arguments. Thank you so much. Now let's turn to Pavol Demeš. So also the status quo question. What are, in your view, the major obstacles to enlargement today, from today's perspective, be it from the European Union side or potential member state side or from the Ukrainian side? Major obstacles.
Okay, thanks. Since there are Visegrad 4 groups on this discussion, so we are looking at these phenomena from the point of view of our region. And Poland has now EU presidency. You are the largest and from geopolitical point of view, most significant country. So I think that I would like to start from big picture, come to Visegrad, and then answer your question more specifically. I think that our 4 countries joined the European Union together in 2004 in this Big Bang enlargement, which at that time I think that basically all four countries had very similar arguments, attitudes towards EU. For us, it was a matter of modernization and entering space club, which all of us felt that it fits us and gives us impetus for further development, reforms, and so on. At the same time, European Union was happy that these countries are three Baltic states and Slovenia, that we are bringing something to EU, because there was generally shared idea of that this is helping EU, not only that it is helping member states. Parallel to that, we were building transatlantic unity because these processes went along with integration towards NATO, and this political, economic, military security issue were intertwined. And Americans had their saying, we want to see Europe whole, free, and at peace. So I'm just reminding these parameters because issue of unity on behalf of those who joined and on behalf of those who were accepting us, both to European and transatlantic community, were widely shared, and we didn't see too much opposition to this. Today, when we are thinking about further enlargement, be it Eastern Partnership countries or Western Balkan countries, we have to admit that we are talking about completely different geopolitical landscape. Multilateralism is dissolved, is in a way shaken profoundly. Today, even UN doesn't know what it does. If you look at Security Council of UN, well, I think that they do not know what war and peace actually is all about. If you look at OSCE, of which we are part of, OSCE is practically not having too much influence on anything when it comes to security. And the United States has changed profoundly. If President of the United States is saying that EU was created to screw America, we are dealing with completely different paradigm within which, foreign policy paradigm within which we are talking about EU and further enlargement. And I just been to GLOBSEC conference this last weekend and was listening to people from the Balkans, from Ukraine who were there, and also Europeans and Americans. And I can tell you that nowadays it is absolutely unclear where we are heading when it comes to EU enlargement. And it was already elaborated by my colleagues earlier. I think that issue of general consensus on further enlargement within EU doesn't exist. We are repeating it and telling about that, but there is not too much enthusiasm for that. If you are talking about individual member states, you will have range from Hungary, which is constantly undermining all kinds of issues related to EU's activities vis-à-vis outside EU activities. But also there is declining appetite on behalf of Western Balkan countries. So many of them see that it is so long and light at the end of tunnel, it's not so shiny as for us who joined the EU at that time, that they are saying that support for further enlargement within Western Balkan countries is in decline. Ukraine is completely different story. Ukraine, for me, it's one of the most fascinating stories when it comes to EU enlargement, because country at war, fighting existential fight, has surprised us in the last 3.5 years so much that even in war situation, that we as EU decided to open up negotiations, and only God knows when and how this war will end. And also that EU leadership is traveling to Kiev so regularly and showing both symbolical but also practical assistance to Ukraine And I think that we can be very proud of ourselves, how we are handling this completely unthinkable situation for Ukraine and for us EU. Nowadays, it is generally accepted that outcome of the war, and Daniel started with that because the securitization of debate, it's going to shape what will happen further, how we will end up with that war, how Russia will behave in coming months, how America and Russia will be able to contribute to settlement of these, where EU together with Britain and Canada are trying to take more responsibility. We will see how upcoming NATO summit in Hague will show up further development within joint responsibilities in settling not only security and military crisis. And last but not least, even if it is not about the EU, but what happened now between Israel and Iran can have profound impact on energy sector prices and so on. So parallel to war in Ukraine, we are having new complicated war situation which can have profound impact on dynamism within and behavior of EU will need to be modified. And last point on EU, on Visegrad 4, I think that we lost unity even on Visegrad level. Hungary and Slovakia are having one attitudes towards Ukraine, towards Russia. Poland and Czech Republic have different attitude. I think that we are unable even to have common position on a further enlargement. We don't have common position on war in Ukraine. So I think that we have to admit that we live in very volatile and unpredictable situation, and we need to calculate it into our thinking about future enlargement, whether it will happen with one country, two countries, and when and how. I think variables are so huge that I wouldn't be able to start speculating on it. But definitely we need to be more creative, bold, and I think that EU is growing into its geopolitical significance due to this crisis which we found ourselves in. And I think that new, fresh thinking also vis-a-vis enlargement is desperately needed if we want to have Europe, as Americans used to believe, whole, free, and at peace. But Americans don't believe in it anymore, and we are even becoming sort of like competitors in this game. So building unity and common shared purpose of keeping EU together and helping those who are knocking on the door and would like to become members, I think is primary task, both for policy making community, politicians, think tankers, and media like EURACTIV Poland included.
Thank you, Pavol. I would say still it's a very universal but gloomy perspective. So I would like to ask you if, in this context of the changed paradigm of international affairs, this lost unity, this volatility, aren't Western Balkan states a little bit right that the light at the end of the tunnel isn't so bright anymore?
I think that I was quite pleased to see atmosphere at latest European political community meeting in Tirana. I think that because I think that Emmanuel Macron very rightly found a way that meetings should be including not only, thinking about further development in Europe, need to include, besides EU member states, also others who are not in it. And I think that there were about over 30 European states, EU plus others, attending that. And I found atmosphere at that meeting quite promising because Europe is awakening into new reality. And I think if you see Edi Rama, he looked quite happy there, and several other leaders, and Ukrainian leaders are not only, who attended that meeting, including Volodymyr Zelensky, who is showing enormous bravery and leadership. I think that we need to work on building platforms for meeting and help each other, not only in these technical issues related to funding, security, but also developing feeling of friendships, partnership, these, because you remember, even for us, before we joined, we had to overcome a lot of obstacles, but I think that the psychological dimension of keeping Europe safe place for us. We need to remind ourselves that 2 world wars were started here. Balkan War was, just after fall of Berlin Wall, and now we have war yet again in Ukraine. So for that reason, I think that this keeping in touch and believing that we belong to each other and that we need to help each other in various levels, I think is of utmost importance.
Thank you so much. Now, Daniel, focusing on constructive perspectives. Let's try not to be just sad. I have a double question. What can and should Ukraine do to effectively pursue EU accession? And on the other hand, what can and should the EU do to support Ukraine properly on its path towards membership?
I think you're absolutely right that there are 2 tracks in parallel. One is accession procedure or accession process as such, and the second is preparation for the accession. And they are in parallel, which means even if the accession process is blocked, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be preparing Ukraine for the accession. So we shouldn't be waiting for Hungarian veto to be lifted to do the job. And now very quickly, what the job is from the, well, this is my perspective, what Ukraine could and should do. 3 things very quickly. First, fulfill the criteria, which means reform itself. There is a concept in political science, the concept of windows of opportunity. I've been usually using this concept in terms of Ukraine's NATO and the EU accession. I remember telling my Ukrainian friends that before 2022 that this is like traveling by Polish railways. So you go to the train station and you never know when the train will come, but you're more or less sure that it will come. But you have to be there when the train comes, and you have to have a ticket. And ticket is precisely reforms. And the moment the train comes, it will be there for a few minutes, and it will not wait for you if you don't have a ticket. So be there, even if the train is not there. Wait for the train, have the ticket, and then jump on the train the moment when it arrives. And this is what happened, from my perspective. This is what happened in 2022 when Ukraine was given a candidate status for the European Union. So I think it would not have happened if there was at least a basis for it. So geopolitical perspective is one thing, but there was a merit-based approach to an extent as well. So we knew that there were reforms in Ukraine conducted in the recent years. So please follow on this path with reforms. I know it's gonna be pretty hard, difficult, especially in terms of economic reforms. But no one requires from Ukraine to be ready for the accession tomorrow. So this is important as well. The second thing is building institutional capacity. Some say building absorption capacity. Again, this is important because there is a tremendous amount of EU acquis that needs to be implemented. This is not going to be negotiated. This is a wrong way to put it. This is accession procedure, but there is little to be negotiated. There are, apart from opt-outs or some delays, exceptions. And the third thing, I'm gonna tell you something which is unpopular, but I think I have to say it anyway. So you may have the greatest deal ever had, to quote Donald Trump. You may have the greatest, fantastic, most beautiful EU accession treaty, but it will not be ratified at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you have to have a consensus of all 27, speaking as of today, 27 member states, and using different trade-offs you may overcome Hungarian veto today to open one or two clusters for negotiations, but this will not work down the road when the moment comes to accept the country, in this respect, Ukraine, as a new member of the European Union. So you have to remember what Poland did during the accession negotiations. We launched a huge PR sort of campaign in every member state to convince the government and to convince the population that there is an added value in accepting Poland as a member of the European Union. Some would say, but the Ukrainian case is exceptional. I don't agree. I remember the case of Polish plumbers in France. This was also a negative campaign against Poland, yet we did it. And sometimes the Ukrainian perspective is that it only takes to talk to the biggest member states like Germany, France, then talk to Brussels, and this will be done because the biggest countries will sort of push the smaller countries to adapt a proper European position. This will not work this way. So Ukraine should work with each and every 27 member states to convince them that it's worth accepting Ukraine as a member of the Union. Now, what the European Union, very quickly, what the EU could do is, of course, help Ukraine fulfill the membership criteria. I mean, even if at the end of the day, there is no light at the end of the tunnel, it's worth doing for the sake of building a strong Ukrainian statehood that delivers for itself and that delivers for its population. So this is not a futile job that is not worth taking. I think it is. Of course, with normally I would say that the greatest thing that they could do in order to support Ukraine is not to spoil it, not to create obstacles for the membership. And I'm always very keen to point to one paradox which I see in Ukraine, and this is again refers to the institutional capacity in Ukraine. So we, on one hand, we want to do it, but on the other hand, we are really doing the opposite in Ukraine. So we are cherry picking the brightest minds from the Ukrainian government and actually getting them to the international organizations to do the job for us. But at the same time, this means that we are actually undermining the Ukrainian institutional capacity instead of building it. So I think there needs to be a rethinking of what we do in Ukraine and what we do for Ukraine. But I think, these are all, again, secondary issues. If Ukraine wins the war, I think all of these, of course, it depends what you mean by winning. That's a bit different question. What's the success in Ukraine? But effectively putting an end to the war and then putting Ukraine on a development path, I think this is priority. And then all of these questions that I am referring to now, these are secondary ones and it could be dealt with. I'm optimistically, I would say this is much more easier than ending the war.
Thank you so much, Daniel, also for the train station metaphor. Very convincing. We also know that not only the passenger needs to be ready, but the train as well. And the railway infrastructure must work, and doubts are everywhere. Now I would like to turn to Nataliya, and I have double question, one from one of our guests and one from myself. So from myself, kind of a follow-up to my question to Daniel. So what kind of support from the European Union and the European Union's member states is most needed in your view for Ukraine at the moment? And the question from our guest, Tamta. You mentioned Hungary's attempts to delay or, in the worst case scenario, block Ukraine's EU accession. However, Slovakia also has a government that appears concerned about maintaining access to Russian energy resources, and its prime minister has made several openly pro-Kremlin statements. In your view, is there a real possibility that Slovakia, alongside with Hungary, could emerge as one of the key opponents to the EU's Eastern enlargement, beginning with Ukraine?
Thank you, Karolina. The first answer to the first question about the aid or support from the EU and EU member states. First of all, I have to mention that support can go far beyond just financial aid. The European Union is a major donor right now for Ukraine, but what Ukraine does need right now, it's professionals, it's staff who can actually implement all those reforms that we have to pass through on our way on European integration. And yes, we have to admit there is a significant shortage right now of such an expertise, tailored expertise to each sector, to each chapter on this negotiation accession process. So my idea is that that can be launched something actually mutually beneficial both for Ukraine and as the European Union. I mean, to launch sector-specific training programs that can should extend beyond just government and officials to include also top and middle level managers and as well as specialists across various industries, enterprises, public sector professionals in key areas such as business, manufacturing, infrastructure, healthcare, and education. And they must be equipped with EU-aligned expertise to ensure Ukraine's smooth transition into the European Union. And to my opinion, investing in the training Ukrainian professionals, I stress here, not just high-level top officials, but exactly professionals for the EU accession, is not just a strategic move for Ukraine. It is, I guess, it can be an asset for the European Union. These experts can bring first-hand experience of operating under war conditions, crisis management, adaptive governance, also navigating emergencies, maintaining institutional functionality, and actually implemented reforms amidst adversity. And it also can enrich the EU's own capacity to respond to future challenges. So I have just an at least pragmatical view, but it's exactly what we do need right now. And I think that by integrating these professionals into the European framework, the EU can gain a pool of specialists adept of crisis response. And while Ukraine secures the knowledge and skills necessary for seamless accession, that can be a priority right now, and it can be actually supportive, you know. Well, this is my answer for the first question, and the second one. That's a sharply timely question. Slovakia under Prime Minister Robert Fico has indeed taken a more cautious and at times openly skeptical stance towards Ukraine's EU accession. Fico has echoed to Russian narratives, yes, criticized Western sanctions and halted Slovak military aid to Ukraine, aligning rhetorically with Hungary's Viktor Orban. And yes, this shift marks a departure from Slovakia's previously supportive posture and raises concerns about a potential Hungary-Slovak axis of resistance within the EU. However, there are nuances. While Orban has consistently acted as a spoiler in the EU decision-making, this may be more transaction, I would say so. Analysts, some suggest, we can say, he could be open to negotiation, using his position as leverage rather than adopting or an outright obstructionist stance, right? That means, I guess, that Slovakia's opposition might be more flexible and less ideologically entrenched and perhaps more susceptible to diplomatic engagement or incentives than the Hungarian ones. And so, yes, Slovakia could become a complicating factor in Ukraine's path to European Union membership, especially if it aligns with Hungary on key votes. But still, it's not a foregone conclusion. The EU and Ukraine still have room to engage Bratislava and I hope potentially prevent a united front of opposition. So it's not such a straightforward as we have a problem with Hungary right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nataliya. Now I would like to turn to Jan and to come back to Daniel's train station metaphor. Let's look at the train. Do you see the current European Union institutional setup as fit for further enlargement, especially with large candidate countries like Ukraine? And if you don't, we heard your skepticism before, if you don't, what must change?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. In principle, the institutional setup is ready. I mean, like it works. It can work, like it works so far, even with more member states. The question is how well it will work. That's the main question. I mean, like even if there is 30 member states, the EU can still work, or even more than that. The EU can still work in the very same fashion as it does right now. But the question really is it even today, efficient, is it, capable of action, when it's supposed to be capable of action? And well, what I don't really seem very fit is the multiple, million vetoes that are there during the procedure of accession, opening everything, too many vetoes in that, by the way, for every single chapter, opening accessions, closing them here and there. It's basically too many. It doesn't really make sense. And then eventually you have national ratification. So you don't really need that many vetoes along the way, but that's something that can be actually changed if there is a political will pretty easily, because there will be vetoes at the beginning and at the end, anyway, and then there's gonna be national ratification anyway. But for the remainder of the institutions, I don't really see it fit, because I don't really think it operates very well today. It's not really capable of action. It's not really it's not really fit for the global age, a geopolitical age, whatever you want to call it. I think it is failing in that. And this also means, but there is no agreement on that. But if you look at history, just let's speak about enlargements in the past. To be a little post-colonial or post-colonial critique, any enlargement to the south and east was preceded by a reform. The only enlargements that were not preceded by a reform were to the west and north. So the UK, Ireland, Denmark, and 1995, Scandinavian countries. If it was Spain, Portugal, Greece, if it was the Big Bang enlargement, including Croatia later on, all of these were always preceded by reforms. And I'm not saying that's this geography or level of development of democracy or economy. It could be, I don't really have any data for that, but I may suspect. Now, so there is people who say, well, first, accession or enlargement and then reform. I don't think this is feasible, and it has not been feasible in the past. And there are people who say, let's not connect enlargement and reform. Well, it has always been connected in the past, since 1970s. Well, 1980s, but the beginning of Greek and Spanish and Portuguese accession process dates already back to the late 1970s. So I do really think that these two issues will be not only practically, but also politically and by popular support linked, and I don't really see there is an appetite or consensus within the EU to go on with the reform, because this reform is potentially sensitive as it concerns, unanimity, qualified majority, or whatever majority voting, right? And I think this is actually the most important problem, along with the number of commissioners, commission of 26, 7, 8, that we had in the past. Doesn't really make sense. It simply doesn't. And if it's 35, it doesn't at all. You have no government in Europe of that size, based on policy sectors. So it doesn't even make sense for the Commission to have so many hats, like ministerial, kind of quasi-ministerial. And that would also be very sensitive, because commissioners in many countries are discursively linked to this national representation, which, legally speaking, is false, because they have to say they're not going to represent member states, but we still call them the Czech commissioner, the Polish commissioner, and so on and so forth. So this is sensitive discursively rather than eventually practically. But for qualified majority voting, I see even less appetite, discussing the rotating presidency, discussing the European Parliament size, discussing some other issues. I guess this can be dealt with in a little easier manner, even though number of MEPs may be sensitive as well. But at the end of the day, nobody actually knows, even Czech MEPs in Czechia or German in Germany and so on and so forth. But for the decision making, in the council, I don't really see the consensus. I rather see two camps, maybe perhaps three. One we don't really lean here or there, but otherwise two camps, and they're not even trying to make compromises in terms of at least negotiating. And without it, I don't really see Ukraine can easily join. Or there's going to be people and politicians, campaigning for that, or politicians campaigning to persuade the people this is a good step, as I said in my previous intervention. So, but I really think it is actually necessary to go along with this way, reforming, at least in foreign policy, perhaps. Or at least parts of foreign policy. Let's begin with perhaps sanctions or some other aspects that are commonly mentioned. But yeah, as I said, I don't really see this happening, and these camps are not really getting closer to get back to Daniel's metaphor. The train is not arriving, right? The locomotive is not connecting to the wagons, whoever is the locomotive and the wagons, they're still on a different track, waiting, in the base somewhere. And without that, the train's not going to arrive to the station. So you may be ready as you want to be. So yeah, that's probably how I see the situation.
Thank you. Another voice of skepticism. Let's turn to Pavol. So you have seen our region, you have seen Slovakia transform post 1999. What lessons from that experience, in your view, still matter today for Ukraine or for the Western Balkans? And what would you warn these countries about?
Yeah, I think that there are few obvious lessons which hold true for any applicant country, that pre-accession period is about fulfilling criteria, and they are set. And I think that here question of every country to fulfill criteria during negotiation process is something what must be widely shared by political and non-political actors in country. I think that at the end of the day, it will be about consensus within the country, and we see a lot of obstacles which are on the road, both internal and external. And the more unity is there between political and non-political actors, the better for any country. Second, you can learn very practical issues, how to reach this consensus, how to inform public, how to do those technicalities on sectoral level, and so on. So I think that all of these countries would do well if they would be in touch with new member states or those who joined in 2004 or later, and learn those technical aspects, not to improvise and not to develop some of own approaches and so on. Thirdly, how to talk to Brussels and how to talk to member states who may have difference of opinion and are not so enthusiastic. I think the diplomacy of these countries, but also civil society actors, policymakers, think tanks, media, academia, I think that they need to be out there and inform European Union, member states, institutions as much as possible. And then how to learn how to absorb assistance from outside in this negotiation process. both on governmental and non-governmental level. There are all kinds of mechanisms which are helping in these processes. So I think that these are those things which are, I would say, non-brainer, because they helped each of us on the road. And then cooperation among neighbors. I think one of the big issues is how settled are your disagreements with neighbors, because EU is scared to death, and usually you can spread panic. If we bring them in, they would bring in problem and so on. And I think that for building relations and developing joint approaches between or among neighbors, particularly in the Western Balkans, which went through rough times, I think that is of critical importance, because there are all kinds of open issues among them. But there are few ex-Yugoslav republics, Slovenia, Croatia, who are already in and proved that also Bulgaria, Romania joined. And I think that there is a learning process and the necessity to build solidarity among countries in Southeastern Europe to help each other. But I would like to warn one thing, that there are few things what I mentioned earlier. Yeah, and by the way, Commissioner for Ukraine, we have big advantage that EU ambassador to Kiev is Katarina Maternova, who is from Slovakia. So Katarina Maternova is extremely knowledgeable and sensitive, because not only that she is Slovak, but also she worked within European Union for about 10 years, and she's dealing with Ukraine and assistance to new applicant member states. So she is very knowledgeable. And I think that I'm reading her social networks reports. She's highly enthusiastic about incredible progress which Ukraine is doing in these negotiation processes. So I think that also using her personal experience, she is not there as bureaucrat, but as somebody who went through this process of profound changes within these countries, who already made it. But she's very knowledgeable also about processes within European Union and its institutions, be it Commission, External Action Service. She understands peculiarities of intra-EU debate. So I would suggest that these would be important thing. And lastly, we need to remind these people also that remind ourselves that during our times of accession or pre-accession, countries like Russia or China were not factors. Nowadays, if you look particularly in the Western Balkans, China and Russia are quite active. They are influencing political community within these countries, directly or indirectly, to hybrid instruments. In our times, nobody was mentioning hybrid warfare against us. And when we see electoral processes within these countries, how they are targeted, because for Russia, disunity within Europe, it's part of the game. China, which is trying to use both economic and political influence in the Balkan region, or are stepping in also Eastern Partnership countries. So I think that there are few things what we have not had experience with, and we need to jointly tackle them, because they emerged as new phenomenon. And last but not least, United States was always very helpful in applicant countries, helping to strengthen democratic institutions, developing free market economies, developing security, and all of these. And I think that under new administration of Donald Trump, we see very different United States. So I think that we need to calculate it into our advice, what we are giving to those who are trying to join EU as soon as they can. And I think that it will be merit-based, and we will see how it goes. But all in all, I will conclude with Ukraine. I think that Ukraine, even if it is fighting, but I think that these technical aspects of and digitalization, what I heard and what I see, that Ukraine is one of the most, probably the most digitalized country, which they understood that they need to modernize and not wait. And I think that this is one of the things what we need to remind these countries, that it is at the end of the day about their courage and their capacity to continue their reforms and dialogue and acceptance of all kinds of assistance we can give them.
Thank you so much, Pavol. Quite a comprehensive and constructive list of advices, both to us in the European Union and also to candidate countries. And for all those of you who didn't manage to note everything, we'll prepare a comprehensive article report from this debate, and you will be able to read everything that was said. So now off to Daniel. I think you have to leave us a little bit earlier. So compound question, one from me and one from the audience. So in your view, will the EU enlargement benefit us as Poles, as the region, CE region, Visegrad region, will benefit us in the European Union? So what benefits shall we notice? And the Q&A question, how serious an obstacle is Vucic's conciliatory approach towards the Kremlin for Serbia's EU accession?
If I refer very quickly to the discussion about reform and enlargement, I think this is to a large extent a small screen. So if you really want to do that, if you really don't want to use reform as an excuse, you would do that. And one of the proposals is to write the reform down into the accession treaty, because the problem is that one side of the discussion, which is insisting on reform, does not believe into the other side, which is insisting on enlargement, and vice versa. So the Polish perspective is we don't want to have EU reform because after the reform, we don't believe you that you would enlarge the union. So one of the options is precisely to write the reform down into the EU accession treaty. And then you want to have reform, you pursue, you move forward with the accession. So I do believe that this is to a large extent in the public debate an excuse not to move further. The same with the QMV. I mean, just saying it as an economist, I saw a large amount of research which is conducted by mathematicians, etc. So not the political research but mathematical research, and the difference now the difference in the effectiveness of making the decisions within the European Union, with even further expanding QNV into the other sectors or into the other areas, is negligible. I mean, most of the decisions are already taken by QNV. So this is a small chunk of the let's say EU agenda that is still reserved for unanimous decisions. We will never have QMV in each and every area, and enlargement is one of them, and this is the fundamental thing. The same with EU treaties. You will always have a unanimous decision in terms of changing the treaties, etc. So I'm not sure if, again, insisting on QMV would really make a difference. But this is my personal observation. I think all these issues like reform, QMV, etc. This is a smoke screen used to delay the discussion about the enlargement. But of course, I may be wrong. Now on whether it pays off or not, there is a problem, and I'm using the word problem intentionally, because normally when we are discussing enlargement, you have institutional setup on one thing and opening the EU market on the other hand, right? But this came together. With Ukraine, the situation is a bit different because we had opening part of opening the market. We already had it like 10 years ago with the association agreement. So normally you would say, if you ask me the question, if it pays off to integrate Ukraine into the European Union? My answer would be yes. Politically, unfortunately, the answer for today is a bit different because we already had, we have already eaten the part of opening the market, which means we have already got the money that we would normally get for Ukraine's accession into the European Union. And here the two countries that have gained significantly is Poland and Germany. Poland in the first place, benefiting from opening the market, EU market to Ukraine. But since this has already been done, this will not be a factor in political discussions. And it will be extremely difficult from the expert point of view to jump the political discussion and say, hey, but we have already benefited, so this is part of the enlargement. Well, it's not. Politically, it's not. So the point of departure for the whole political discussion is a bit different today for Ukraine than it would normally be for any other country like a decade ago. So now the cost and benefit calculus is different. But again, even if we are assuming that we are sidelining the benefits of Ukraine's integration into EU market that happened like 10 years ago, this is not my data, but I saw reports by Bruegel and the Jacques Delors Institute. So the cost is 0.1% of GDP for every country. And this is the cost that do not really influence the net net beneficiaries of the EU budget. Not yet. Again, why is that? Because you have to remember that there is a maximum cap on EU funds that flow from EU budget to the capital, and because of the situation that we have today, Ukraine's economy is more or less the size of the economy of Slovakia, which is not that amount of money that the European Union would not be able to generate if you want to enlarge itself and accept Ukraine. I think here in this respect we have a political problem rather than economic problem. So there will be new winners and there will be new losers of Ukraine's accession. The cost per se will not be huge. But because the cost will be unevenly distributed, we deal with a problem how to compensate the cost to those who will suffer from Ukraine's EU accession. Who these people are, we already know. Let's just look at Poland. There is agricultural sector, this is transport sector, and a few other sectors. But the same situation applies to Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, so all the countries in the region that face the pressure, economic pressure from Ukraine, starting since 22nd when the EU facto unilaterally again opened the market further. So this is I think this is a valid question. How to think about these new winners and losers already today, how to deal with the problem already today, before we really come to the discussion about the cost of enlargement, about the cost for EU budget. Again, per se or on balance, the cost will not be high, definitely manageable, likely even without significantly or even without increasing the EU budget, without fundamentally, that's important. I know that some of the EU experts may not agree with me, but I have a different view. So EU policies are what we make out of them, which means if you don't Ukraine to be part of CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, Ukraine will not be a member of CAP because we will change the internal regulations. Before Poland joined European Union, CAP also looked a bit differently, and other sectoral policies also look differently. So we may change sectoral policies so that they fit us and not necessarily benefit Ukraine. This is not a problem. I mean, this is the matter of political will. The calculations as of today are false. I mean, as I would put it this way, because I do not really believe that the European Union would look the way it looks today the moment Ukraine joins the Union. This will be a bit different Union, so we have to take this into account as well. But I just wanted to share one last observation, because the again, this budget and these economic issues are always brought up or recently brought up in the discussion. Why we shall not enlarge the European Union. I don't have a silver bullet how to change it, but of course you also have to take into account what's the added value of having Ukraine on board, and this is IT, very blossoming IT sphere. This is a big energy sector. This is when we may have some jokes about the US policy, but this is again a large mineral resources in Ukraine, a very well developed industry, especially defense industry, high tech, mil tech, etc. So there are different sectors of the Ukrainian economy that are really interesting for the European Union and from the European perspective. And ending on a geopolitical note, if this is geopolitical necessity, I don't like this term, but let me stay with it. I mean, if this is geopolitical necessity, we have to think in the geopolitical terms. So my answer to this question is, if we are into a long-term confrontation with Russia, which I believe we are, I would love to have the Ukrainians together with their resources, and this is, to put it bluntly, human resources and very physical resources in the country. I want to have Ukrainians on my side in a potential confrontation with Russia.
And Slovakia and Vučić. Sorry, Serbia and Vučić, sorry.
I'm sorry, I have absolutely no idea about Serbia, but I don't think that the rhetoric could really be a problem. Again, if someone is using rhetoric as a problem in the accession process, this is also a small screen. Problem is not what he says, problem is what he does, likely in the country.
Thank you so much, Daniel, also for your constructive points. Although I saw a little idealism in that, more of the pragmatism, which sounds important as well. So now with this, I would like to turn to Jan and ask you about what citizens think and how does it influence the enlargement path happening or not. So what do you think is the influence of citizen attitudes on the enlargement on the potential window of opportunity appearing or not appearing? And how would you interpret the skepticism of Europeans, on many Europeans, towards the enlargement? Because there were Eurobarometer opinion polls held about also the enlargement options. And for example, 2 years ago, the EU level was on 53% only, I would say, positive towards the enlargement. In Slovakia, it was just 48% for enlargement, 41% against. In Czechia, it was 54 enlargement and 37 against. In Poland, we were much more enlargement enthusiastic, with 67% for enlargement and 25% against. So, Jan, what's the influence of citizens' attitudes, and how would you reckon what are the reasons of so much skepticism among our region citizens?
Thank you. This is a very empirical question to which I don't really have a data, especially concerning the underlying determinants of public opinion. But anyway, in the first place, if you just look at the most recent data, there is not much of a appetite for enlargement among European peoples. So among people in different EU member states, perhaps for various reasons, but what's perhaps, from my perspective, the most worrying is that there is not considerably high support for enlargement, even in countries which are long-term supporters in terms of their foreign policy or EU policy or whatever we call enlargement, you know. But even in countries which are long-term supporters, at least rhetorically at the political level, of you know, enlargement policy and, you know, accession of new EU member states, there is not much, you know, appetite among the people. And there is even less appetite in those countries which are more reluctant towards enlargement, and always have been politically. It's been UK in the past, you know. Well, UK always liked enlargement because there's been a little less deepening, but people didn't really like enlargement. But if you look into France, and many other countries, you know, even Germany, but even if you look into Czechia, you know, the latest data I have is, you know, around 40% of people is in favor of, you know, accession of Ukraine and other EU potential accession countries. That's, you know, 40%. It's not terribly a lot, I would say. And for the reasons, this is what I see, and clearly we do have European integration is for, you know, quite some time now outside of this permissive consensus, you know, in which people's attitudes or citizens' attitudes were not really so relevant for what's happening, you know, internally, but also when it comes to enlargement. This is, you know, well beyond and past us. And today, really, public opinion matters for the behavior of politicians at the domestic as well as European level. So I do really see it very difficult for politicians to be very openly for, you know, accession of new countries and enlargement policy per se when they face this, or they would have to invest a lot of political capital into persuading people that this is a good thing. But then, you know, look at individual countries. Politicians usually need to spend political capital on many domestic issues, not on enlargement, really, which I completely understand because, you know, people at the end of the day will not vote for them or kick them out of office because of, you know, an enlargement. So I see, you know, the environment and using the train and whatever metaphor, it seems that they're on two tracks, you know, and also, you know, the workmen who are supposed to join the trains together with the train and the wagons, you know, the coaches with the locomotive. They are, you know, hiding in the, you know, warehouse because it's heavily raining and they don't really want to go out, you know. So there is nobody really to move on. And I know this is an overstretch of the metaphor, but anyway. And for the reasons are very different concerning individual accession countries, right? For Turkey, this has been, you know, always highly cultural in the past. But, you know, for large countries, you know, like Ukraine, it's highly economic to a certain extent. But also, then there is this inward looking. If you look at politics, this kind of inward, outward looking, you know, internationalist, cosmopolitanist, you know, and localized, you know, cleavage or conflict dimension. That is linked to liberal conservative, by the way, you know, conflict dimension is becoming more and more important. And this is also reflected most likely in the attitudes of people towards enlargement, because some of the people are, more and more people are inward looking, you know, and they don't really, you know, have these, you know, outward looking, more globalization, more trade, you know, oh, new country, we will be able to trade, you know. These people are very often now more and more inward looking, you know, just, you know, protect us economically and, you know, don't bring, you know, some more globalization related processes. And obviously, extending the membership of the EU is such a process. But these reasons are definitely cultural, definitely, you know, definitely economic, you know, definitely along the lines of, you know, communitarian and cosmopolitan kind of political dimension or division in a society. And this really differs country by country. But look at the debate, and just, you know, I'll finish. The debate in Czechia now is, you know, linked to Ukrainian refugees in more and more hostile manner over time. And this is a reflection of this communitarian cosmopolitan, right? You don't want, even those who are ethically close now, you don't want them, you know, And you frame, some of the politicians frame this along this kind of migration refugee, but then they link it to economy, welfare, and so on and so forth. So I do really believe that this communitarian viewpoint is a little bit, winning over the cosmopolitan or globalized one, and this doesn't really play very well towards, future enlargement of the EU, or doesn't create an easy environment for it.
Thank you so much, Jan. I would like to stay with citizen attitudes and turn to Nataliya, because I saw last year's EU Neighbors opinion poll conducted, I think it was in April last year, among Ukrainians. And I saw it today after studying Eurobarometer. And I was surprised to learn that only 52% of Ukrainians have a positive image of the European Union. Can you tell us, do you have knowledge, insights? What do you see and sense among Ukrainians? How this EU accession potential is perceived in Ukraine by Ukrainians? And is it really a universal wish to be a part of our club?
Okay, first of all, European integration still is a priority for Ukrainians. And I have to stress that over 60%, and this is a poll on December 2024, over 60% of the citizens of Ukraine trust to the European Union. And even more, I would say 47% have confidence to European Parliament. It's interesting because the level of the confidence to national parliament actually in December showed that it was at 13% of the Ukrainians trust to our national parliament as well, actually, and 20% to cabinet of ministers of Ukraine. And so this is kind of an interesting thing, because I have doubt that all Ukrainians that had participated in that survey knows how the European Parliament actually is functioned, and they do not elect representatives. But this is a trust, this is confidence. Still, I have to say that the European Union is associated in a public opinion, in the public mind, is mostly with freedom to travel, study, to work anywhere. And according to also last surveys, there's 49%, yes, about 49% stress this, and quality of life for future generation, economic prosperity, like 40%, according to social survey. This is the most significant target to integrate to the European Union, and especially in social security and democracy as well, and peace. But anyway, we are on the process, and this kind of this short blocking steps from some European countries, and we already discussed today, they can be kind of disappointed, for Ukrainians. It's a high stake expectations. People are tired, exhausted from the war, and for them, the European Union is something, associated with peace, prosperity, and they admire the quality of life, the level of life in the European Union. But when somebody says blocking, no, you are not, relevant, or just you have to do this, and it's not always actually reasonable, as I already said today about Hungary, there's recommendations or demand. It can be quite a little disappointed, and this can be, also affect public opinion. And yes, there is a downward tendency last years, but still the European integration is priority for Ukrainians.
Thank you. And Now a compound question to Pavol, but actually I noticed we have also one very important question from the audience. So maybe a multi-compound question now from me. How have you observed the attitude of the European Union and member states has been fluctuating as regards enlargement and the specific countries' enlargement? And how would you assess the EU's current narrative on enlargement? Is it still inspiring or not so much anymore? Maybe too technical and too cautious? And the question from our audience, how to ensure that the democratization of the candidate countries is permanent and they don't backtrack once joining the bloc, which would bring damage to the whole bloc? So important that we were supposed to speak maybe a little more about democracy.
Yeah, I think that we are coming to the end, and probably I would like just sort of like do almost like my personal wrap-up thing. For me, it is important that we are discussing EU enlargement because I strongly believe, as somebody who comes from the region which was transformed by preparatory steps and then by joining EU, and I think that it was tremendous help for our citizens and both Baltics, Visegrad group or Southern Europe. So I think that I wish that we would be able to help those who are not so lucky yet, either south or east of us. And I think that there is, besides geopolitical arguments, which we discussed, there is moral argument that we need to help those who need help, because if we speak about European values, this is part of it. Secondly, I believe that we never thought that Europe will be yet again tested on basic issues like security in such an extent that what we are seeing now. So people within European Union see a lot of or have a lot of anxiety about future. Sweden, Finland joined NATO. Two neutral countries. But in many, we are out of paradise of peaceful enlargement, but we need to take enlargement also as a pragmatic step to show that Europe, in order to play important role to secure peace, stability within its borders, plus helping others to join, that we are confronted with all kinds of geopolitical actors, and we need to take enlargement issue into consideration as part of our strengthening our position within global competition. So it is not only luxury of enlargement, but it is, I think that we need to convince also our citizens in respective republics, member states, that this is of utmost importance, and we couldn't stop this process which has been started, and we need to help both Southern Europe and Eastern European neighbors, particularly Ukraine, what we are discussing as a very prominent issue. Now, the second question which you asked is about ensuring that once you become member of EU, that you will not see some phenomena which are not compatible with political, ethical, economic issues which were part of pre-accession process. And I must say that if you look at my home country, Slovakia and Hungary, I think that many people would argue that we would have real difficulty to join EU because just fulfilling criteria, let's take democratic criteria, attitudes towards media, civil society, just political culture. I think that we are having, it is fundamental issue, and we need to admit that there is necessity on the level of EU to to remind ourselves that this is automatic, that every new member is already sort of without any mistakes. But in this regard, I would like to remind us also Brexit. I think Great Britain, which was helping us to join EU, and Britain through assistance program, political support, was one of the key countries which helped EU enlargement. And at some point, EU, through experiments, decided to do a referendum, and just Britain left. And now we are having series of negotiations between EU and Britain is extremely valuable partner for EU, but it left EU. So I think that whole EU is fascinating group of nations. It's alliance, but it has its ups and downs. And we need to remind ourselves that this is never-ending story, how to build unity, cooperation within EU, but also helping further enlargement processes or helping others, and that we have our important position in global arena, which is shaken so much due to multiple crises and the crisis of multilateralism. So I think that the more we speak about it, the more convincing we are within EU debate, but also talking to our partners, the better for future of whole continent.
Thank you so much. We have reached an end of this discussion. It was really inspiring and full of concrete pragmatism. I would like to thank our great speakers with us, Jan Kovář, Pavol Demeš, Nataliya Vinnykova, and Dr. Daniel Szeligowski. Soon we will publish the comprehensive article report on EURACTIV Poland. And thank you again for being with us, for the questions, for your insightful replies, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.